Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Next Up Narcissism. Today, we're going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to talk about relationships that are not narcissistic. We're going to talk about relationships and just the everyday stress and difficulties of being in a relationship, even healthy ones. So today we have somebody who I adore, another therapist in Philadelphia. Her name is Elizabeth Earnshaw, and she is a licensed clinical family and marriage therapist, certified Gottman therapist as well, and founder of A Better Life Therapy. She's known for her popular Instagram account, Liz Listens, which I highly recommend you follow. She puts out the most amazing resources and breaks down really difficult topics into bits of information that you can not only understand, but you can also apply. She's the author of Till Stress Do Us Part, and I Want This to Work. And her new book, Till Stress Do Us Part, is coming out in September. I believe it's for pre-order now. And she's been featured in the New York Times, USA Today, the Washington Post, and more. She lives between Philadelphia and New Orleans with her husband and children. And for more, you can visit her at elizabethernshaw.com. Everybody, and welcome to another episode of Next Up Narcissism. I'm so excited to have our guest today because I adore her and she's brilliant and her work is brilliant. Liz, I would love for you to give us a quick introduction to yourself and who you are and the fact that we're in Philly and still have yet to meet for coffee.
I know. Can't make it work. So I'm Liz Earnshaw. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I work in the suburbs of Philadelphia seeing couples, and I'm a certified Gottman therapist. I've also written 2 books. One is called I Want This to Work, and I have one that's coming out very soon, which is called Till Stress Do Us Part. And my main focus is working with people in relationships. It's my passion.
And I'm really excited for today because we're actually going to talk about stress and difficulties in non-narcissistic relationships because everybody has stress in their relationships. Everybody has ups and downs in their relationships. And I think it's really helpful to hear from an expert in healthy communication strategies and, healthy work that can be done in a relationship where both parties are capable of doing the work. Oftentimes with narcissists, one's not capable of doing the work or unwilling to do the work. And I think it's important to show that when you do have 2 participants who are willing to work on their relationship, even if they lack awareness, but they have the willingness, I think makes the big difference. So I'm super excited to go through this today. I'm going to start with the first question because I think it's one that's really important before you even I would imagine, dive into working with couples. But how do you even begin to identify what the stressors are in your relationship? We're so busy day to day, and then we just come home and we're just agitated. We don't even know why we're agitated. We don't even know why we're angry or resentful. We just feel that way. We feel stressed. So how do you even take the first step of identifying internally and externally what the stressors are?
That part's really challenging. And when I'm meeting with people, they usually have no idea, right? So they come in and they're fighting all of the time, or they're spending no time with each other and they're pointing fingers at each other. Like, oh, they are so critical. They're so angry all the time. They just want to be in the basement, not hang out anymore. And those things are like accurate depictions of what's going on, but they don't realize that that's all happening because their lives are really overwhelming and both of them have completely gone outside of their window of tolerance, right? So it's like,
I love that. Yes.
Today was a horrible day at work, and then you want me to come home and hang out with you and be conversational? No, I can't do it. I want to go be in my room by myself and not talk. Or today was a horrible day with my parents. They're sick and I was dealing with a hospice nurse or whatever it is. And now you are asking me to be friendly and kind. And I just can't. I'm irritable. I'm annoyed with everybody. I hate the world. And so the first piece I think that's really important is if you and your partner are having friction is to think, are there things going on in our lives, whether it's a few really big chronic things, or is it a lot of little constant acute things or a mix of both that could be contributing to this? And if the answer is yes, then really it can be pretty cathartic. Sit down and write out, what are all of the things we navigate? Some of the stress could be positive and some is negative. So like, well, I'm navigating getting, my house repainted. That's really exciting, but it's still a stressor. I'm navigating getting the kids to school every day. I'm navigating, kids not being in summer camp, having to take them to all of their things and working at the same time. And so if you write out that list together, it can be really eye-opening, and it can also just be a first step to seeing, wow, we are dealing with a lot.
I think that's so important because one of the things that you kind of differentiate is these small stressors. It's like a culmination of them over time, even something like sitting in traffic. We don't realize, all of these little stressors over time create this, this sometimes like mountain. And it's really hard. It's I equate it to like baking a cake. That's the example I always use. You have the eggs, you have the flour, you have the sugar. And those are all your little stressors. But once you put it together and bake a cake, it's really difficult to pull out and tease out the ingredients once it's all made. And so, but being mindful of these small stressors along the way can help you have a better understanding of kind of why it's such a big mountain in front of you. But as far as doing this together, what do you recommend for people who are saying, well, I would love to do that, but my spouse would think that my spouse, you have a spouse, my spouse would never do something like that with me.
So, I think that that's always honestly the biggest challenge is that one person is usually aware that there's some issue. They might not be fully aware of what the issue is. And the other person is either aware of the issue and avoiding it, or they just like genuinely have no awareness that there's an issue. They're like in la la land.
And it's not malicious.
It's not malicious.
It's a genuine kind of disconnect.
Yes. And I think that's a third category is maliciousness, right? So some it's avoidance, but not malicious avoidance. It's just they're overwhelmed. They can't look at it. It just feels like too much. Then there's this other type where it's not malicious, but it's la la land. They don't notice. And then there's, there are malicious people where it is like there's something going on for them where they're seeing the suffering and they don't feel like dealing with it because they kind of enjoy it. But if we're in those first two categories, obviously the very first thing you want to try, and what a lot of people say, well, I have, and it doesn't work, is to bring it up to them and to say, these are some things I noticed that's going on. I want it to improve. If they're still not willing to see it at that point, I really encourage people to be a broken record and to have pretty good boundaries around things. So, and again, that's not immediate. Like we give people the benefit of the doubt with maybe this takes a few conversations. Maybe this takes putting on a podcast while we're in the car together and having them listen to something not from me, from somebody else, because it might hit differently. But then if not, it is important if you're recognizing, let's say stress is an issue, that you're starting to have some limits. And maybe for the person who's in la la land, they start to see the impact because you have those limits. And for the person who's avoiding it, they can no longer avoid it, right? So it's like, okay, I'm telling you that our lives feel out of control and I'm unhappy with how that's impacting us. You're saying it seems fine. I'm going to actually ask you moving forward to take the kids to their lessons because I'm overwhelmed by that. And maybe you're not. So maybe you can take it on. And it doesn't need to be passive aggressive, but just direct in terms
Just matter of fact.
Just matter of fact.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you find that when people are having these conversations and one, let's say, starts to get defensive, right? Or one starts to become avoidant, what happens when the other person then shuts down? What do you recommend? Because a lot of times, if people are in these conversations, they just get to the point where I'm so sick and tired of having this conversation. And again, it's not malicious on the other person's part. I'm not excusing the behavior, but if they truly understood that they were hurting you, they would never want that. I think a lot of times, and I'm sure you see this all the time, I'll say to people, well, have you told them that? Well, no, but they should, well, it's a cliche, we can't read people's minds, but we really can. And if we make the assumption that just because they quote know us because you've been married for 20 years, we all come to the table with our own patterns and perceptions of the world, and we're not going to accurately see how somebody is feeling. You can't necessarily see that. And so, what do you say to people who either shut down in those situations or go with the assumption, well, no, I didn't tell them, but they should just know.
So this is what I see in couples therapy the most, right? That's usually when they've gotten to couples therapy because they're like, the conversation is not moving forward. I'm so done. I'm so mad. Um, a couple things is one, if you can back up to like 10 steps before you started to shut down. So if you're listening to me and you recognize I've shut down, I've said like, F this, not dealing with it anymore. They should just know. I shouldn't have to tell them. I want you to go back like 10 steps. And let's say that it was their defensiveness that made you feel shut down. I want you to try to figure out a different way to deal with their defensiveness. And what that might look like is they get defensive. I'm going to give an example that's really common. It has to do with work usually. So somebody says, I'm exhausted. Like by the time I get home at the end of the day, I need your help. I worked too, and now I'm the only one. I do the dinners, da 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 da, and you are still responding to your boss.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I can't take it anymore. Like tell your boss to butt out. And then the other person is defensive and they say, I don't know what you want from me. Like you wanted us to send the kids to private school. And like, if you want to do that, then I have to do this. And you don't understand my boss and da 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 da. And then the other person is like, well, then I guess I don't matter. I guess your boss matters. And so I'm not going to bring this up anymore. Do what you want. And instead, I'd like you to reverse. And number one, respond to their defensiveness by being assertive and direct. So instead of getting caught into it, saying, I get that there's other things that go on with your job. What I'm asking for right now is for help in the evenings. Like, we need to do this together. That's what I'm asking for. Don't get caught. When people are defensive, they're defensive because they're feeling threatened. And they're going to say things that they don't necessarily mean. Don't get caught into all of those things of trying to argue about like your boss versus their boss. Instead, go back to your message. Defensiveness is a distraction and it gets off topic. So, babe, I know your boss sucks. I get it. And you can have some empathy. And whether your boss sucks or not, I'm going to have a meltdown if we aren't doing night times together or if we don't figure out another way to deal with the kids together at nighttime. So you're sticking on your position and you can show some empathy. If you have a partner who stonewalls and just shuts down, I think it's really important to think of that through a lens of stress. Whatever you're talking about is causing them stress. Again, I'm not excusing that they're adults and they need to learn how to deal with their stress, but they're feeling shut down. Maybe they're thinking, there's no win here. I want to help my partner, but I also don't want to get fired. What do you want me to say? And if you can recognize that as a shutdown state, you can say, instead of, you never want to talk about this, you just sit there quietly. I can see that whatever I brought up is really overwhelming. Maybe it feels like there's a no-win situation. It's still what I need. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to like think about this, but we're going to talk about it again. And then give that person some time and some space.
So they don't feel as thrown off, and you kind of give them time to be objective and to take it all in rather than feeling so on the spot, especially if they don't manage their emotions well, if they become
Yes.
easily overwhelmed.
And what we know about that stonewalling response is often when it's not coming from a malicious place, often it's because somebody is what's called flooded and their body has started releasing stress chemicals into their bloodstream, which actually makes it for them impossible to speak. They are not able to have that thought functioning that they need to problem solve, to show empathy, to be affectionate to you. And so you need to take at least 20 minutes for that to go back to baseline. So it's not helpful if you keep trying to talk. It's more helpful if you take the break.
I love that. And I think that's a really good strategy to use for people that have difficulty regulating or even just sitting with feeling their emotions, if you take more of that kind of, chemical approach to it, it really does make a ton of sense. Your stress hormones are overwhelming right now. Your body, is basically doing what it needs to do in, as in survival mode. The last thing you can do is take in and internalize the message that I'm giving you. And so to know that that's not a flaw of your character, but rather a very normal, physiological process that's happening, I think people may be able to handle that a little bit better because they realize it doesn't sound as blamey or finger pointing or something's wrong with them. It's a true chemical response that just needs to settle down so that they're able to take in the information and interpret what you're saying and feel their feelings.
Absolutely. And I think once you do that, it depersonalizes it on both
Yes.
ends. So it's not as much, when my husband gets angry and it's the opposite is true too, right? Like it's not just shut down that is a result of stress hormones. It's also when people are all over
Yeah.
exploding. And so, if I know that when I'm overly upset, I stomp away, like that's my reaction, the flee reaction. And if my husband is saying, well, you shouldn't do that, come back, talk to me, da 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 da, da, I can't. Like I am going to stomp further and then I'm going to yell and then I'm going to go into the room and slam the door. The same with when he's upset, he's like perseverating and like yelling about things and da 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 da, not necessarily at me, but about the thing. And if I'm like, well, you should think about that in a different way. And like, can't you just, it's not going to help. If I can instead say, babe, I can tell this is really upsetting to you. I'm going to go like out back for a little bit. You can kind
I
of,
love that.
then we have time to soothe our bodies,
That's
which I
right. I
think
always say the power is in the pause.
it is. It
Just
is.
that pause. And it's not, you're not giving in, you're not ignoring. I always talk about the function of behavior. I know you talk about this too. Is that if you look at the function of why people are doing what they're doing, not on the surface what's being said or what's actually, being done, but the underlying reasons to why. You're not marching away because you're angry. You're marching away. And the function of that is to release those stress hormones so that you can regulate yourself. That's what you do.
Exactly. Yep. And so that's one of the things, especially if we're talking about stressful stuff, then of course people are going to become stressed. And so we really need to remember that has an impact physiologically on our capacities to communicate.
I love that. I think that's so important. I think that's not talked about enough, to be honest. I think we talk about the emotional aspect and obviously emotional, all that's important, but I think it's really important for people to understand that it's more than just a feeling. There's actually stuff going on in your body. One of the things that I know you talk about a lot is this concept of things that you have control over versus things that you don't have control over, and directing your attention within your relationship to the things that you do have control over. And I know that concept's going to fluctuate based on, could be day to day, could be moment to moment. But how do you suggest that people even begin to identify, again, same kind of with the triggers, but how do you even suggest that people identify what they have control over and what they don't? How will they know?
It's complicated because we often convince ourselves that there are a lot of things we don't have control over
What do you mean?
when we like kind of had some control. So there's always going to be things we don't have control over. And I like to put that out there first because, you don't have control over it if you've gotten diagnosed with a really bad illness. You don't have control over it if somebody's died, if you randomly lost your job last week out of the blue. There will always be things in life we don't have control over. Because we know that, though, we have to prep for a life where there's a lot of things we don't have control over by making sure that our stress cup isn't so full that when something difficult happens, when something like the refrigerator breaks, something on that end of the scale, or something on the more complicated end of the scale, like you get an illness happens, that you have a life where you'll be able to manage that. And what I've noticed with the couples I'm working with is that we are mismanaging the amount of stress we bring into our lives without thinking about what's the long term repercussions of that. And a lot of that is because we say yes to way too many things and we put so much pressure on ourselves to do, to accumulate, to, live a big life, all of these types of things. And those on the outset, they feel good and it feels like we can manage it, right? And I often use the example of like home stuff because that's something that I notice with my own couples, like there's always something they're spending money on in their home. There's always something they're like redoing in their home. And then what happens is somebody gets sick and they come in and they're like, well, you don't understand. I'm the only one managing the renovation of our bathroom. And also I'm taking the kids to like these 80 events and da 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 da. And I can't help you with your mother who is in hospice care right now. And you're not helping with this. And so one of the things is actually to challenge yourself with, are there things in our lives that we've brought in that are causing us stress, even though we want them? We want our kid to be involved in 80 things, or we want to send them to the expensive school, or we want to take this vacation that we're putting on a credit card, even though we can't afford it. But like, is that causing stress? And did we have some control over that? And often that's like a very hard thing to face because people will really try to convince themselves, I needed that, or I have to do it. I have to prepare food this way, even though it's the crux of their arguments is like dinner. You never help with dinner, da, 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 da. And then you're like, well, it sounds like they wanted to help. Well, they can't do it because I like to have filleted fish every night and da, da, and the
And
person's
it's
like,
just easier if I do it myself. So
it's
I'm
just
just going to do
easier.
it.
And I looked at the ingredients and it has to be these ingredients. And they didn't pick up the right cucumber. I like this other cucumber. And like, these are true arguments that I'm hearing. And I'm thinking, what's the quality of your life right now when you're not managing how that's causing stress to you because you're trying to meet some sort of ideal, right? Or because you're trying to be like the perfect eater, the perfect mother, the perfect housekeeper, the perfect employee. And so a lot of what I talk to people about has to do with that.
I like that because I agree with you. I think that we don't even consider that it's the things we want or think we need that are actually causing us stress, right? I mean, wanting to be a healthy eater is an amazing goal, value to have. But when your efforts to accomplish that goal are one, taking you out of the present moment, two, causing you a tremendous amount of stress,
3,
you
not
know,
allowing anybody else to help you.
correct. And then I'm sure feeling resentful, right?
Yes.
And and I agree with you. I think I'm assuming it's a bunch of things, but in today's, when you said it, I hear this a lot, and I do this myself. We take on so much because either we think we can, we think we should, we think we need to, and then even after we do all that, we still feel like we either didn't do enough or angry somebody didn't help us. And so, the other day, I this happens a lot with me. And the other day, I actually forced myself to do this. I was home and it was towards the end of the day. And I remember thinking, I was in the shower. This is when these like thoughts come up. And I said, what the hell did I do today? I did nothing today. I did nothing today. Like I didn't do anything. And so you already have this idea set up in your head that you did nothing. Now you feel bad. Now you feel, resentful of who knows what. So I forced myself to make a list in my head of everything that I did that day.
Good for you.
And by the time I got to the end, I was absolutely horrified that I actually considered the fact that I had done nothing that day.
Wow.
Right. And so I think when people have all this added stress they're taking on, there's this gap between, because I'm sure if I'm doing it, I'm sure other people are doing it, there's this massive gap between what we actually do and what we think we do. Because I think we just look at things that are givens as not, almost like the things that are given that we need to do are not allowed to be in that stress pool.
Yes. Yeah.
right? Like taking my kids to school or taking my kids to activities is a given. I have to do that.
Yes.
So therefore, it's not part of my stress. It's like the extra stuff is the stress, but that's not true. And that's what you're talking about is it's all of this.
Yes. And we don't like necessarily look at that, right? We're like, oh, well, I have to clean, I have to do this, da, da, da. And then we add all these things in, or we don't give ourself permission to get rid of some things because we don't think our lives are hard enough.
Right?
Right.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, like I always use the example of lawyers. I work with a lot of lawyers, and their profession really causes them a lot of stress. And it impacts their families often pretty negatively. And depending on, where they are in house versus in a big practice. And one of the things that I'll say to them is, it sounds like they're asking you to work 24 hours a day. And it's true in the big law firms. You always have to be there. It's making you miserable. It's making your family miserable, da, 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 da. And they're like, but this is a job. This is just what people do. And I'm like, yes, but on top of that, you also are managing like other parts of life and you can't do it because of this job. And so what would happen if you changed the job? What would change? And then they're like, well, I don't know what I would do with myself. And I'm like, I guarantee you would find some things to do with yourself because you're already doing them, but you're doing them in a way that is making you miserable.
Right. So what would you recommend for people? Let's say somebody can't leave their job, right? Let's say somebody is, so embedded in their career, they're not leaving, they have too many expenses, whatever the case may be. What are strategies that people can use in relationships that they feel stuck in, or in relationships that they just feel completely overwhelmed, or even not overwhelmed, but just in a disagreement with their partner or a family member? What are some strategies, emotion regulation techniques, tips, skill sets that are useful in those situations that they can kind of do in the moment?
Yeah. So there are things in life that we can't leave. We can't get rid of. Like we have our kids, they're our kids. We have jobs that we have to keep because like it's embedded into our life. Illnesses we can't get rid of, debt that exists, right? But what I usually have people do is I have them sit down and actually think about their stressors. So let's write them down. And then I ask them to split it into 3 baskets. So, what are the things that in your life you can shed? What are the things that you can prevent? And then what are the things we have to adapt to? So, for
I have to
example,
do this.
it's really helpful actually.
I have to do this.
When you don't have to do everything at once, but you go through that list and you're honest with yourself, like these are things I genuinely think I have to shed. So some of those might be small tasks. It might be I need to get rid of all the crap in our house, right? Like it's just so every Sunday, I'm actually doing that myself right now. Every Sunday, I put something on nextdoor.com. That's like a very easy ask for me to do. I don't need to save money to do that. I don't need to like plan anything. I just start getting rid of it. But some of the tasks might be a bigger task to do. And those might be things like, I think I do need to change my job. I think we should sell our house because we can't afford it. I think we do need to figure out other childcare situations. It's going to take longer. We have to interview people, but maybe I need somebody that can help us drive. I think we have to, maybe that gym I'm going to is causing me so much stress because it's so expensive. I think I should change it. So you're going to put everything that you could shed that would improve your life. Even if it's hard to do, you don't have to do it right away. The next, and obligations is a huge one. I want to be the Girl Scout troop leader, but I work 40 hours a week and can't do it, right? So you might not quit tomorrow, but in your mind, you're thinking, this is actually an obligation that I could get rid of that would free up my time and reduce my stress. The next category is prevent. So when you're thinking about all the things that are stressing you out, are there some that you honestly could in some way prevent moving forward with structure and plans? could be
Prevent the stressors from occurring, you mean?
prevent the stressor from occurring. So you might write like a huge stressor for me is mornings before school. And me and my partner get in fights all the time. Well, it's like, okay, so the way we can maybe prevent some of this is, do you need a plan about who's in charge of what? Do you need to have the clothes ready the night before, even though that's exhausting? It's way better because then you're not looking for underwear for everybody all over the house at 8 a.m., which is what happens in our house. Like, where is it? It's not anywhere. So these are things we can prevent. It could also be financial things. Like if we had different structures around how we managed our money, could we prevent that we get shocked by the credit card bill every single month? And then the last category is adapt. And these are the things we can't change. So the example you gave is like, I have to stay in this career for right now. Like our debts exceed, if I changed positions, we wouldn't be able to pay our debts. Or, I have to get my license as a therapist. So I've got to stay in this for 4 more years until I get my license or whatever it is. It's miserable, but I'm going to have to figure out how our family can adapt to this. And that's where you and your partner non-defensively talk about the fact that it does have a true impact, that caretaking an in-law does have a true impact. You're not going to not do it, but you're going to be non-defensive and say, I know that when we're, going to my mother's house every single weekend to clean it, it's really impacting you. So what are some things that we could shed in other areas so that we can adapt to this right now? Or how do we co-regulate? Or how do we show more empathy? How do we learn to complete our stress cycle? And so those 3 categories can help people start to organize. There is some stuff we can do about all this stress. It's not easy, but there's some stuff we can do so that over the long term, it impacts us less.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I find that when, obviously when you break things down into categories, our brain processes them differently. They, become less overwhelming because now instead of 50 things, it's 10 here, it's 10 here. And okay, I can handle this. But I like how you also, and I say this too, to start really small and to understand you don't need to tackle this all right now. And if you did try to tackle it, it kind of goes against the entire idea.
It becomes stressful in itself.
Yeah. I mean, it really just kind of, it doesn't make sense. You're going completely against what you set out to do. And I also think that when you have options, right? So when you see things spaced out and you're able to look at it rather than everything being jumbled up in your brain, but when you're able to look at your options objectively, it gives you, again, that pause, that space to be able to take a breath, regulate your emotions, and think before you act, right? And think about how you want to respond to your partner. Think about how you want to respond, to your boss, or think about what you want to give up or not give up before, you just kind of act on emotion. Because, when we're stressed, the easiest thing to do is either to shut down, like you said, or to act out or lash out, like you said, because it's a release. And sitting with it is a hell of a lot harder.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so when we're noticing all of that lashing out behavior, and whether that's withdrawal or yelling, it's so incredibly important to be able to say, let's actually look at the enemy here. And the enemy is like, we have too much going on. The enemy is we're outside of our window of tolerance because of that. And let's approach that together as a team.
I like that, because then you have kind of this shared enemy, which automatically kind of, brings you a little bit closer. We know that. That's social psych, but we know that, right? We know that when you kind of are joined on the same effort, or even the same enemy, that you just naturally kind of find your groove with the person a little bit easier than if you're on opposing sides.
Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about taking responsibility? You talk about that a lot. What makes you happy, and how people can define happy, because happy for me looks different than happy for you. And happy, I always say, happy is a moving target, and we never want our goals to be emotions, because they change. I mean, I could walk out of this room after we're done and, trip over my son's shoe in the middle of the room, and now I'm annoyed. But literally 5 seconds before that, I was in a great mood, and now I'm
Right.
not. And so, how do you have people define what happy is for them, and how do you have it be kind of this shifting narrative? And how do people gain control over that? How do they figure out how to gain control over what makes them happy and take responsibility for it?
One thing that I think is really important for people to do is to think about like, what's your North Star? And what I mean by that is like, where are you going? Where do you want to be? Like you and your partner as a family. And that has to do with your values, right? So if you value, what we really want to work towards, what our North Star is that we're creating like a safe and secure family, or we're creating a stable financial future, or the thing that we want to create is an adventurous life. Like whatever it is that you
So
value.
your value, your family value, your kind of combined family value, we'll say.
Yes. Yeah. And also thinking about individual values too, because you want relationships that support individuals,
Yeah. Yes, for
So
sure.
our family value might be we want a safe and stable family. I might have a value that I want professional achievement or something. My husband might have a value that he wants, a calm life. Like these are things that you can talk about together. And then what you're doing is you're focusing on how do we create a life where those things exist and where they can all coexist so that we're in line and we have integrity when it comes to what matters to us. Often, when our lives are out of control, it's because we're not actually dedicating to those North Stars. And we might think we are. So it gets tricky because we're like, oh, well, I want a safe, stable family. I also want career achievement. But is it doing that for me? Am I getting all of those things when I'm saying like yes to every single interview offer? And so, and is there a way I can still have professional achievement and a safe, secure family and not deny the important opportunities I have, but not say yes to all of them, right? But we get confused and we're like, well, I want achievement. So I'm going to say yes, every opportunity I get. If they ask me to fly to LA, I'm going to fly to LA. If they ask me to get on the phone, if they ask me, but I have to be able to say, how do I get all of these things that we want, that we say is core to us together? And my husband wants a calm life. And so if I'm doing all of this, I'm getting in the way of that. Same with him. If he's like, you know what, I just want us to chill. We need calm in our family. And then I'm like, oh, but I made us another reservation or I planned another vacation and I da 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 da. And then he's like, but wait, you're taking my calm away from me.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
um, and I could think that to him, wait, you're taking my adventure away from me. You're taking my achievement. So something that is so, so important is that we're not thinking, do I feel happy in this moment? How do I feel happy? Because that's actually usually what makes us get those quick dopamine hits.
Correct. And it takes us further away from our values, which
So
makes
much
us more
further away.
anxious and more stressed.
But recognizing even when life is hard, if we're going towards our values and making decisions towards our values, then overall we're going to feel more content. And overall, we're going to have a life that's more pleasing to us and that we feel proud of. And that's less of a moving target.
I love that. I think that's so important because life is life, right? And it's more about living a life that you're proud of, right? Like you said, a life that you feel fulfilled with, but that doesn't mean it's not going to have stress. And it's that acceptance and willingness to you don't have to like it, but you do have to accept that it's there. And I think a lot of times people do whatever they can to get rid of it or not feel it. And that's exactly what you're saying. Those actions to not feel any of it or to take everything on because for whatever reason you feel like you need to, that takes you further away from those values. So in your experience working with people, what do you find is the most frequent reason for people holding on to their unhealthy patterns as a couple,
Yeah.
their relational patterns?
I think, one is conflict avoidance. usually conflict with outsiders, unfortunately, and not so much conflict with each other, which I don't think we think of it that often, right? Like there's other conflict avoidance things that couples do with each other, but usually when there's some sort of like outside stressor and it's impacting the relationship and a partner is saying like, the way that you deal with your family is causing me a lot of pain. The way you deal with your work is causing me a lot of pain. How much time you're dedicating to the volunteer organization is making our family distracted and messy and da 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 da. Usually the other person hears that and they don't want it to impact, but they are very afraid of the conflict with the outsider.
Okay, interesting.
And that's usually a huge barrier. And it's so complicated because there's layers there. It's not as easy as saying, just tell your mother that
Just have a boundary, right?
exactly that she can't keep asking us for money because there's something emotional there usually for
Yeah.
the partner who's struggling with that. And that emotional thing might be like fear that the other person will reject them or fear that they are not a good parent. Like, I really wish you would stop coaching your kids' baseball team because it's just too much. Like we don't have the time during the week for you to be doing this. And it's not just, I'll get that time back and quit. It's, am I letting my kid down? Am I not being the dad or the mom that I always dreamed that I would be? Is the team going to be mad at me? And so there's often a lot of conflict avoidance. And one of the things I'll say in therapy is, why is it more important to you to avoid your mom, your boss, the co-coach, whatever it is? Why is it more important to avoid them being mad at you than this person sitting next to you? I'm curious at why it's so much more comfortable for you to have your husband or your wife angry with you and hurting and resentful than it is to have your boss or your mother or your sister or your friend. And that's usually a pretty profound question.
I was just gonna say that was that like hit. So what are some of the answers you get to that?
Well, usually people recognize that what they're doing is BS.
Right.
So
Right.
they very quickly go, oh,
Uh-huh.
and they look over and they say, well, it's not easier for you to be mad at me. And I'll say to them, it actually is for some reason. And I want to understand the reason because we've been meeting for 7 weeks about this. And every week it's the same thing. Your partner is saying to you, your mother is so mean to me and it breaks my heart. And you let her come over and you let her degrade me and you let her da 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 da. And your partner has said this for 7 weeks. And you've said for 7 weeks, I don't want her to do that. I'll talk to her. I'll deal with it. And you haven't talked to her. And your wife or your husband has been very mad at you for the past 7 weeks. So the reality is it is easier for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I am genuinely trying to understand why.
That probably floors people.
It does. And,
Yeah.
the partner feels very validated.
Mm-hmm.
They'll say that's exactly my problem isn't even what your mom is doing. My
Correct.
problem is that you are okay with me being upset with you, but you're not okay with your mom being upset with you. The problem is not that that your boss didn't let you come to the hospital when our kid was getting cancer treatments. That's on your boss. The problem is that you were okay leaving me alone with that. You were okay leaving your kid to feel like they weren't supported, more okay with it than you were with maybe getting in trouble at work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that goes to the whole idea of it being malicious versus not, because when you bring that to someone's attention, even my reaction was like, oof, I never reframe, that's a strong reframe. And so
I oof a lot of my
yeah. I think that's one of those moments where, when people say, well, how do I know if they're doing it on purpose? That right there, that sudden, like, oh no, I didn't, no, I don't want to hurt you. No, I don't care more about that. I mean, that's a very important, I think, thing to pull out in therapy.
And like some people will be defensive. Some people's initial
Sure,
response,
because it's uncomfortable.
how
Yeah.
dare you say that? Like,
Right.
my mother is sick. and
Right.
my wife is not sick, or my boss could fire us and then I can't afford the school that we're choosing. How dare you say that? So like, I'm not saying that. I will say 75% of people are like, oh, no, that's not what I want. I'm sorry. And then I would say that like 20% are like, that's not right. That's not really what it is. You guys are against me, whatever the defensive
Yes.
response. But even with those people, usually when I let them do that and then I say something like, this is not an attack on you. This is genuine exploration of why. What is it about your relationship with your mother? What is it about your fear about what will happen at work that is so much more powerful than the fear that your partner is going to divorce you? Like, I'm genuinely, because it must be so powerful. It must be so scary that you're risking this. And I genuinely want to know. And at that point, usually even the most defensive person cries or apologizes or it talks about it, well, you're right. Like this, it definitely comes from like my mom used to like beat me up when I was little if I didn't do what they wanted, and I am still acting that way. And then there's, a very small percentage of people who that does not get through to them and they do what they want. And that's something to look at. And if that's,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. I think that that comes to a point where, if your values and your concerns and your emotions are not even being considered by your partner, that's a whole different situation. This is for people, like you said, even if they're avoidant and they don't get it at first and they don't have the awareness at first, but over time, and their will, I see that's the key thing, the willingness to want to make it work, the willingness to change, even if slowly over time, the willingness to hear your partner and to make changes and finding a compromise. And that to me is the kind of the key thing that differentiates that between people that don't want to change, don't care to change, versus people that just may not understand how or know how or feel comfortable with change. I mean, change is horrible. Change is so hard. I mean, like you were brought up before, painting your house. I mean, even like picking paint colors is hard. Imagine having to stand up to, your mother who's, let's say been controlling your every move since you were born. I mean, it's really a lot to ask of somebody, but I think the way you just phrase that is it's non-judgmental, it's not attacking them, it's validating both people in the situation.
yeah.
Which
And
as
I
a family
often
therapist is very difficult to do.
so hard. And I often have the other person then take a more empathetic stance.
Yes.
Because then it's like, okay, and then, because they'll kind of snicker for a second, like, yeah, see, it's more important that,
Yes.
I'm mad at you and I'll say, no. I want you to hear your spouse is so deathly afraid of losing their job because they just said that they won't make you happy because you feel happy with the beach house or because you think a successful spouse is sexy, or you need to hear that.
Yes.
They're not
Yes.
putting the boundary because they're afraid of disappointing you. And it's easier for you to be mad than disappointed. Or you need to hear that she doesn't put this boundary up with her mom because she watched her mom be abused her whole life and she feels very guilty and she's stuck between a rock and a hard place of, my spouse is okay. My mom has trauma and I'm trying to love on her. And like, you need to hear that is why it's easy for you to be mad.
Mm-hmm. And it gives people that opportunity to test these new behaviors very slowly and give themselves the chance to see that nothing bad happens.
Yes.
Right. And then that the partnership doesn't break up and that one's supportive of the other and that it's okay then to take that next step and that next step and that next step. But, that initial shock of, I have to change this. It's very overwhelming for people.
Yes. And so then like the goal is how do you do it together? And that's that whole like adapting category.
Yeah, I love that.
And it is saying something like, I know you really wish your partner was home for these things, but it sounds like right now there are some good reasons they're not, which you can empathize with. Turning to the other person and saying, and you can empathize with your spouse that thing you're doing is impacting them. What do you do together to make this not have such bad reverberations? Is there something new you could do or plan for the long term? If the fear is, if I lose my job, I can't keep up our lifestyle. What are you willing to do together to make there be like a less stressful lifestyle so that if you did lose your job, it wouldn't be horrible? Because then you're going to have more power to put boundaries up with that job.
Liz, this has been so informative and so amazing, and you're helping so many people. For the last couple minutes that we have, can you talk about your book? I want to hear what it is and what exercises are in there, and what people can expect. It comes out in September, correct?
Yes, it comes out in September.
I'm very excited for you. Just kind of give people an overview of what it is and who it's tailored for.
Yeah, so it's called Till Stress Do Us Part. It is written for couples who find themselves overwhelmed with life, which I think is like most people in relationships right now.
No, not at all.
And so it is a kind of mix up of my story of kind of starting to understand that a lot of conflict in my relationship was because of stress. Some of the aha moments I had along the way where like I found, oh, mental load, it must be mental load. And then like my husband and I kind of fixed that and we're still stressed. So like what else is happening? And I talk about that. I talk about like client stories. They're not real client stories, things that I've seen in the therapy room. And then at the end of each chapter, I give what's called like session notes. And I talk about like what was being done with that client, that couple, to help them improve. And so it might be an activity or a conversation that you can have. And then the ending really gives you like the system to use to start to look at stress and change the way that it impacts your lives.
I love it. I love it. Tell us where people can find you and all your amazing work. And there's a ton of it. Tell everyone, I love all the stuff you do. It's super creative. And it actually, one of the reasons why, not to go off on a tangent, but one of the reasons why I love your work in particular is because you take something that is so heavy and you make it, I don't want to say fun, but you almost make it fun.
That's
like I remember maybe it was like 2 years ago now, 3 years ago. Now, last time we spoke, you were doing something. It was like a treasure hunt. It was like finding objects in your house that were right.
Yes.
Like I mean, she comes up with the most creative stuff to do in couples therapy. Because I think when people think couples therapy, they just think it's screaming, and the therapist is just this moderator or mediator, and and that's not. I mean, I'm sure that happens, but that's not how you approach things. It's just always, I don't know, there's like bright colors and there's shapes and there's like activities.
Yeah, I like to make it fun and I use humor a lot, which I think is why people let me use those zingers with them too. Because I say it and then I laugh. I'm like,
slide them in.
I'm sorry.
But yeah, tell people where they can find all your stuff, all your goodies.
Yeah. So the easiest place to find everything is at elizabeth.earnshaw.com. So it's just my name. You can find me on Liz Listens on Instagram. And then my books are available everywhere books are sold. So you can look up I Want This to Work or Till Stress Do Us Part, wherever you buy your books.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This, again, like I said, was so informative, so beyond helpful. And it's really good to hear tips and strategies for everyday normal stress, and that it's not only is it normal, but it's healthy. And, and the strategies that you give to get through it are not these overwhelming, scary approaches to take. So thank you for that. And thank you for breaking it down so that people are not scared to do it.
Thanks for having me on.
No, this is great. And we will definitely talk soon.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Next Up Narcissism. I hope you found it useful, but most importantly, I hope you found it validating. Want to work one-on-one with me? Visit my website at drjamiezuckerman.com to book a personalized coaching session, and be sure to check out my on-demand workshops on topics like co-parenting with a narcissist, life after leaving, anxiety management strategies, and more. Again, that's drjamiezuckerman.com. You'll also find links to my interactive workbooks, merchandise, resources, and newsletter sign-up. Next Up Narcissism is as much your podcast as it is mine. I want to hear your feedback and what you want to hear. So make sure to leave a podcast review wherever you listen or send an email to nextup@drjamiezuckerman.com. Again, that's nextup@drjamiezuckerman.com. Be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Make sure to tune in next week to see what's up next on Next Up Narcissism.